Okay, everybody. Hello. Welcome to the Linux Users Group meeting number 5. I am Vincent Maggard here with the Users Group, and today we're going to be talking, me and Tyler is going to be doing a talk about why this Linux thing is better than this Windows thing. But first, let's get a few housekeeping things out of the way. So what is this? This is the Internet Linux Users Group. This is a concept for a users group that I developed a while back, and I decided to give it a try. Basically, what it is we hold a weekly users group meeting via Google Hangouts. We allow guest speakers to come and join us on Google Hangouts and speak about different topics related to Linux. I'm looking at the possibility of doing some other things around it as well. We have a website which you can follow for the latest information. There will be a link to the website in the description below. So, and then today I am here with Tyler, and one of the admins in the group. Say hello, everybody, to everybody, Tyler.
Hello.
So, folks, me and Tyler are going to be doing a presentation today on why Linux is better than Windows. This should be good. Am I not wrong about this, Tyler?
You are not wrong. Also, holy crap, I just realized how bad I sound.
Okay. Anyways, so let's begin.
Yep.
Okay, so first thing, what's this Linux thing anyways? I mean, we keep mentioning it in this group. There must be something called Linux in the world. Well, what Linux is, it's an operating system. Well, if you want to be technical, it's actually a kernel that an operating system is built off of, but we're going to assume you are non-technical users watching this and you don't really care about that stuff. So Linux is an operating system. It's like Windows or Mac. You install it on a computer, you click buttons in a GUI and things happen. So it's an operating system. Works in a lot of ways like Windows or Mac does, except for it's better, in my opinion. It's laid out more like a Unix style environment, which Mac is, because Mac is heavily based on BSD, it is very Unix styled in a lot of ways, but not as much as something, say, as BSD or even Linux. So that's one thing that gives it a lot of stability. It makes it a lot more reliable, and it makes it very friendly to developers. Customization. You can customize the crap out of a Linux distro, can't you, Tyler? I mean, you can customize the desktop environment. You can do custom icon sets. You can write your own theme. I mean, everything you want. You can write your own desktop environment if you want to get crazy. You can even build your own Linux distro if you want to have Bob's Linux. Yeah. It's possible.
Yeah, I think we actually have a slide about that.
We do.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of teasing here. But anyway, so what is a desktop environment? That's one of the main things we can customize here. That's the GUI you're looking at. Well, you can customize it. You can, if you're a developer, you can code the crap out of it and change whatever you need. Otherwise, you can use a lot of really great tools to modify a lot of settings. And for example, if you're using GNOME, there's the GNOME Tweak tool, which gives you a lot of fine-grained control over your GUI. You can control, do you want minimize buttons on Windows? All kinds of cool different things that you can turn on or off. You can change the colors. You can put a dock at the bottom of the screen or to the left or to the right. You can add extensions. You can write your own extensions, all these different things. For example, one of the things I like is there's a weather plugin I use on the GNOME desktop, and it tells me my current local weather station's current temperature, and it also tells me what the conditions are and a little icon next to the temperature. So I can just glance up at the top of my screen, and I can instantly see it is, say, 70 degrees with rain. And then that's easy. So for someone like me that likes the weather, that's great. But again, there's extensions for all kinds of different uses. You can customize your desktop environment via extensions and code and all these different things to your liking. It's very, very customizable, much more than, say, Windows or Mac is, where you're pretty much got to deal with their GUI. And yeah, you can theme it a little bit, but it's not anything close to the way Linux gives you control. What about versions of Linux? What about distros? That's something you're going to hear a lot, is a distro. Well, what's a distro? A distro, it's a version of Linux, right? And I spelled version wrong in this slide, folks. Sorry. But what a distro is it's a version of Linux where you have the Linux kernel and all the components and programs that make up a Linux distro. So you'd have your kernel, your bootloader, all that stuff. You would have your desktop environment and all that. And again, if you make your own distro, you can control what all those things are to determine based on your needs. However, there's plenty of pre-built Linux distros out there, so you don't have to be a developer and do that. And again, plenty of developers don't write their own Linux distro too. You can, but you don't have to. That's an option. And apparently I spelled, oh no, this is the same slide version as well. I thought I misspelled it in 2 places. And anyway, so it's all the tools and everything and the GUI and everything and the kernel. That's what a distro is. Now, some of the popular distros you may have heard of is Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Arch Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux / CentOS. And there's many others out there as well, but those are just some common ones you're going to probably hear about. If you don't hear about Ubuntu and Arch and Red Hat, I don't know where you are. Linux Mint's pretty popular too. Those,
Yeah,
I mean,
if you haven't heard of Ubuntu, what's your issue?
I mean, if you're in the Linux community, you've never heard of Ubuntu, okay, you may want to investigate why you've never heard of it. Pretty popular.
Yeah, I'd send a private investigator for that.
Private investigator, yeah. Tyler's like, let's get that private investigator in here. So again, anyone can make a distro if they want to. There's even some GUI tools out there that will let you make distros, so you don't even have to be that much of a programmer. There's a tool that the Red Hat people make that allows you to take, say, CentOS and then or Fedora, and then install your own packages on top of it and everything. It's kind of limited in what you can do because, again, they want it to be simple for like sysadmins to like make a version of CentOS that has like a bunch of stuff pre-installed. But it's cool. It's a great tool. Yeah. Talk about security here for a minute. Now, Tyler, as somebody that's used Linux for a long time, I'm sure you and me can touch on this a lot. Windows has a lot of issues with viruses and security issues, and Linux has some of those issues for sure. It's not perfect. And Mac has some of those issues too, but to a far lesser extent. But the fact is, when it comes down to security, Linux is your best bet. We have the least viruses in the industry, and most of the viruses we do have are targeted at server systems. And again, so desktop systems are not going to be affected by that, or embedded systems like the Raspberry Pi. I mean, a standard Linux desktop is not targeted very much at all. Doesn't mean it couldn't in theory be hacked, but it isn't being targeted as much. The other thing is Linux has a lot of security precautions in place to try to prevent malicious software from being able to do that much damage, assuming it does get into a system. So, for example, you do not run as root. You do not run as the administrator under Linux by default. You have to actually actively go under that user to do an administrative action. And in most Linux distros, you only run under root just long enough to perform that action, such as installing software or installing an update. And as soon as that process is done, you're dropped back to a root level. And I should point out that every process is run as a different level. So you could have an update running as root and your browser running as you. And that's generally what happens. So even if I open up a terminal and I do a sudo apt update and a sudo apt upgrade, that's going to have to run as root because, you know, it's got sudo in front of it, and it's going to have to run as root because those are root level required privileges that are needed to do that.
Yeah.
Because you're making changes to system files. But it allows you to minimize that risk because, again, your web browser is not running with administrative privileges, etc. I think Tyler had something to add there. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, just as a quick note for those of you who don't know, sudo just stands for super user do, which is the root command to do root administrator type things in the command line.
Exactly. So if you are on a lot of Linux distros, sudo comes pre-installed, and sudo allows you to act as root, but only for that command. And as soon as that command's done running, everything's in that shell drops back to non-root level immediately. And all other programs are not affected by sudo. So if I'm using sudo to do a sudo apt upgrade and I have Chrome open at the same time on that machine, Chrome's still running as me and does not have root privileges, but the apt program does. And so it's able to segment those. So these are just some of the reasons that Linux is a lot more locked down, because again, you can't do very much on a system, even on Windows. Most viruses can't do much damage even on a Windows system if you're running as a non-administrator, but the very few Windows users actually do that. When I used to use Windows, I did, but again, I think I was like one of 10 people. So, you know, but there's a lot of other issues too. I mean, you've got telemetry issues on Windows. Not really sure about Mac, how much they do that, if any. From what I've heard, they don't seem to do the telemetry stuff on Mac. But one thing I don't like that both Microsoft and Apple does, though, is they add a lot of this cloud connectivity into their OS. It's like I don't want that. I don't want that. I've even seen some Linux desktop environments do that where it can connect to your Google account and all this. And I'm like, no. My OS is not talking to any cloud servers, any cloud providers. I don't want that to have anything to do with them. If I want to connect to a cloud provider, I will set that up myself. I will install a third-party tool. I'm not interested in having the OS or the GUI built-in do that. And again, with Apple, you have iCloud built-in and iCloud syncing. With Microsoft, you've got OneDrive built-in and OneDrive syncing. Again, I don't like it. It's just not something I want to deal with. Again, so for that reason and many others, Linux is definitely top dog in the security world. And I should point out, most servers in the world run on Linux, and you don't see them getting hacked every day. Think about that. Telemetry, we just touched on this a minute ago a little bit. You know, Microsoft does a lot of telemetry. For example, one of the things they do in Windows 10 is they report what programs are in use, how often you open them, things like that. They're always reporting what apps you install through the Windows Store, which increasingly is where a lot of apps are coming from on Windows. On Mac, really the only example I know of telemetry in theory would be the fact that the Mac App Store, keeps track of your apps. But again, that's not that bad. Linux, most Linux distros has virtually no telemetry. You've got some stuff like Ubuntu where, like, when you first install it with the latest version, you can send some anonymous system information to them. But even compared to the stuff Microsoft's sending, it's totally different. What about cost, right? I'm sure that Tyler can touch on this issue as much as I can. Me and him both don't want to spend $1 million on a license for an OS. As somebody that is licensed,
or in the case of Apple's stuff, buy hardware. A new system.
Yeah, and buy a really expensive piece of hardware, which is like 90% just standard off-the-shelf parts with a few custom parts around it.
In the touch of the new MacBook, the latest one, worth about a quarter of its retail of the price that they're selling it for.
Of course, Apple always upsells. But anyways, so Windows licenses are expensive. We're talking for a personal home license about $120. You want Windows Pro, which has some more features that you might want. You're talking, I think, $220 or something like that now, or was it $180 that I seen? It was one of those two prices for the Windows Pro. But anyways, the point is, you're spending a lot of licensing fees, and that's on each machine you want to run Windows on. If you have 10 machines, if you're like me or Tyler that has 1 million machines sitting around that you're doing different stuff with, if you're gonna use Windows on all of them, you need to go out and buy a Windows license for every single one of those machines. So if you have 5 machines, 5 times 120, that adds up quick. As far as Mac goes, yeah, the OS they don't charge for, but again, comes back to the fact that their hardware is more expensive. Their hardware is nice, but again, it's just high-end, off-the-shelf hardware a Windows machine could run on mostly. So go get you a used ThinkPad. You're going to have just as much power and just as much reliability. And it also runs great with Linux. The Lenovo people and IBM both has strived to make the ThinkPads run really well under Linux. A lot of places that use Linux use ThinkPads. Another issue with Mac OS is it's harder to use Android devices, for example, or other third-party devices. Apple kind of loops you into their ecosystem, right, Tyler? Yeah. And that's horrible. I mean, it's not impossible to use an Android phone on Mac OS. It's not impossible to use third-party devices on Mac OS, but the fact is, it's a lot harder.
Certain things.
It is a lot. It is a lot harder. It is a lot harder to do.
You literally can't use any dongles except for like the $40 one that Apple provides, from what I've heard. Nothing else will work.
Well, I don't know about that, but that may be the case. But the point is, most devices and stuff you can get to work with a Mac, but it's going to be very annoying. You're going to have to go through a lot of loops and problems, and it's just not going to be as seamless into the OS as, say, using an iPhone would be versus, say, using an Android phone, right? Now, Linux, again, most Linux distros are free. There is a few out there that they charge for support, and they make you have a support contract to use it. Red Hat Enterprise Linux comes to mind. OpenSUSE's enterprise version comes to mind. But again, most of those do have equivalent free versions. Like, for example, CentOS is the equivalent non-support contract version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's binary compatible. So if it says that it has to run on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, for example, get CentOS, and you can use it just fine on there, and it won't care. And again, so most Linux distros are free, and the few that are out there, you're paying for support, and support's a nice thing. Almost all the major Linux distros do offer allowing you to pay for support separately. Like, for example, Ubuntu doesn't charge for Ubuntu, but you can turn around and ask for a support contract, and they'll be more than happy to give you a 1-800 number and everything to call and all that. Stability of Linux. I think we've kind of hinted on this a lot already, Tyler, over the last couple meetings, and even in this one. Windows has a lot of issues.
Yeah.
It crashes all the time, or at least it has for me. I've had several Windows users tell me it almost never crashes for them. Really? Well, I've had plenty of Windows machines. I've been using Windows since I was like 7 or so years old, and I remember it crashing from then on, all the time on every machine. Even at my mom's place of work, it would crash everywhere. So, you know, I mean, yeah, maybe it doesn't crash for you, but you're what, one of 10 million people that got lucky. Anyways, for the rest of us that doesn't want our machine to crash every 10 minutes and wants to actually use our machine and find it crashing, we're not going to be using that. Mac is instability. It's a lot more stable than Windows. But again, Windows is so unstable. Pretty much anything would be more stable than that. I mean, you could take 10 minutes and write a really crappy command line operating system that does nothing, and it would still be more stable than Windows.
Yeah, it's just a crappy command line.
I mean, you wouldn't want to use it, but I'm just saying, Windows being more stable than Windows itself is a very low bar to cross. But Apple has crossed it. So, and to be fair, Mac OS, as somebody that's used to use Mac OS all the time, I can say it actually is pretty stable. It doesn't crash very often. It doesn't really have that many issues. Now, some of the later versions, I've seen some instabilities on it. I do occasionally still test stuff on Windows as a developer and on Mac OS. And so I can still comment on the stability of those platforms. And I have to say, Windows 10 ain't that much better than the older versions of Windows as far as stability, maybe a tiny bit. And Mac OS, I've noticed the opposite. Mac OS has become slightly more unstable in the last 2 or 3 releases, and I don't know why, but for whatever the reason. But again, Linux, you have almost no daily issues. You know, as long as you're maintaining that system and keeping it in good shape, which you should be doing with Windows systems or Mac systems, you know, you're going to be fine, right? Generally, you're not going to have an issue. Don't go into the Linux system and delete the entire hard drive. Yeah, then you're going to have issues. But assuming you're not stupid and do things that you shouldn't do, or download virus.tar.gz and then open up the binary inside and run it, assuming you don't do stuff like that, you're probably going to be just fine under Linux. Again, there's edge cases where you could have problems, but compared to Windows or Mac, particularly Windows, the stability is phenomenal. And then you say, but I like the way Windows looks, or I like the way Windows acts, or I like the way Mac looks, or I like the way Mac acts. Well, as somebody that likes the way Mac looks and somebody that likes the way Mac acts myself, I can tell you right now, you can customize Linux to be very Mac-like. If you want a Mac-like experience, you don't have to go to Apple to do it. You can go. You can go in and you can take the GNOME desktop. You can install. There's a dock program I use. I think it's called Simple Dock. It's an extension. It gives you a dock that's real similar to the OS 10 dock. Not exactly, but it's the same functionality. It looks a little different, but again, you get that experience. You can put it on different parts of the screen. You do that. If you want a window, you can change the icons to look like Mac. There's actually Mac icon packs out there for Linux that does that, but I personally don't like those. I personally have a different theme set that I use. But anyways, you can customize it to your liking, as we talked about earlier. So you can customize it to look like Windows. There is whole desktop environments like Pantheon that looks like Mac OS out of the box. So go get Elementary OS and Pantheon if you want it to be like a Mac OS experience. I mean, talk about a Mac OS clone. It feels like it. I have not Mac OS. I have Elementary OS on one of my machines, and it really does feel like I'm on a Mac. I mean, granted, it's definitely different in some places, but it's very close. I would say it's probably the most out-of-the-box Mac OS experience you're going to get on Linux. If not the most, definitely one of them. As for Windows, there's Linux distros I've seen that are designed to look just like Windows 10. Why you would want that? Again, I think Windows 10 looks ugly. I mean, if you like that, you can get that distro, right? You know, and then also you can take a distro like Linux Mint and style it to look a lot like Windows. It already looks kind of like Windows with the start menu there, and you get that functionality, but you can style it and make it look even more like Windows if you want.
Yeah.
Again, it's Linux. This is not Windows. This is not Mac. You have ultimate control over your machine, and isn't that a wonderful thing? I mean, who doesn't want control of their machine?
That's another great thing about Linux. Just like another one of the main things. You have full control over it for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, you have ultimate control. As if you are a developer, you can literally write your own kernel changes and literally control the deepest parts of the system. Try doing that with Windows or Mac. You can't do it. So,
well, you can, but
you'll have them
have to break into Microsoft's Office.
Well, if you did that, let's put it this way: the police will be knocking on your door shortly. So I wouldn't do it, right? But Linux, you can do that all day long, and they won't care. In fact, not only they don't care, they'll say, "Hey, submit your patches back to the kernel. We'd love that new feature you developed," right? So they're big supporters of that. If you're a developer, I can't really think of a better place to be than Linux. It is the most supportive environment for a developer. As somebody that used to develop on Windows and used to develop on Mac, I have to tell you, there's just no comparison developing on Linux. We should have had a slide for developing on Linux. I didn't think about adding that, but I can tell you right now, and I've heard plenty of Linux developers say this, that isn't me, that say that used to develop on Mac, used to develop on Windows, and from no matter what it is, programming wise, it's pretty much easier on Linux. For example, services is so easy on Linux. It's so simple. Try doing a service on Windows. You have to go through all this complicated stuff. On Linux, if it's systemd, you make a config file. You put it in a particular directory. It finds it. It knows the service exists, and you can run the service. And it's pretty simple. Google it. About 20-30 minutes of learning, you can use what you need to make that config file, and you got a service. If you're on one of the older systems that doesn't use systemd, or a system that's not using systemd, they're usually using like one of the older initiation systems or the init systems. And again, they have a similar strategy. Like some of them, you make a bash script that's real simple with a particular format, and you put it in a particular spot, and then it finds it, and that's the service or whatever. But the point is, it's real simple regardless. And it comes to the same thing when it comes to development, other aspects. For example, installing libraries is so simple. Most libraries, you can do a sudo apt install, or you can do a yum install, and there it is. You don't have to go download the binary and go through an install wizard or anything like that. It's just really simple. And packaging your apps is simple too. Yeah. All you really have to do is you just make a package. You make a package directory, and you put some things in a particular place, and then you make a deb file out of that, and you make a yum file out of that. Not a yum file, an RPM file out of that. And depending on the distro, you send it, to the right place, and voila, you have it. And there's even automated tools out there to package on Linux. So, for example, when I make a deb file for, say, Ubuntu, Debian, Linux Mint, etc., systems like that, I don't actually need to do it through a command line. Yes, I can, and plenty of people do, but there's actually a little command line. There's actually a little GUI tool I use. It's written in Python, and I didn't write it. It's a great tool. Forget what it's called. I think it's called like DebWrite or something like that. And it's a nice little GUI tool written in Python that allows me to just easily go through and tell it what I want the installer to do, right? And then that's it. And it gives me a little deb file as an output. And then I simply just send that out to my website for people to download, or wherever I need it. If I'm sending it to a friend and try my program or something, it's easy for them to install. It's just like any other program from a manufacturer. They click on it, they run the install, type in their password, and off it goes, installs everything. Talking about like putting something in the desktop menus. Well, in Mac OS and Windows, that stuff's pretty complicated. In Linux, that is so simple. It's not even funny. All you have to do is make a .desktop file, and you put it in a particular directory. The desktop environment, regardless of which one you're using, as long as it's one of the current ones that are supporting the current desktop standards, which pretty much all the current ones are, then it's going to see that file, and it's going to say, okay, new program. And then it's going to add that to the proper category in your drop-down menu and your start menu, or whatever. Well, I shouldn't say start menu, but whatever they call it, the menus that look kind of like the start menu. Or if you're in Pantheon, it's going to be, in the menu up in the top, and then you can drag it down to the dock. The point is, it's dirt simple to do this, folks, as a developer. So I would highly recommend developing for Linux, obviously. I'd like to exclusively develop for Linux, but some of the stuff I write is too widespread use for me to be able to really do much with it if I just push it towards the Linux market. So unfortunately, some of my stuff is available on Windows and Linux. I mean, not Linux. I mean, of course, it's available on Linux, but some of my stuff is available on Mac OS and on Windows. And we'll talk. I want to talk about developing for Linux here in a future topic, a future talk, by the way. I want to talk about developing Python apps for Linux, and then also Electron apps for Linux, because I do both, and they both have their pluses and minuses. In fact, you can actually have Python and Electron work together and have a Python Electron app combo. I've experimented with that before a little bit too, and there's different ways to do that. So it's pretty cool. You can do some pretty cool stuff. Basically, you have the Electron app be the GUI and the Python be the backend. It's pretty cool. Anyways, that pretty much covers our talk. Tyler, is there anything you want to kind of touch on here that I didn't say?
Not that I can think of. One other thing that I just thought of. You there?
Yes, I'm waiting for you to say your
Sorry.
statement.
As I was saying, yeah, there's one other thing that we kind of forgot to go over: the performance.
Oh, definitely. That's a big one, folks. So
Yeah.
another thing we should definitely talk about is the performance of Linux. I have took Linux and put it on a Windows system that was, getting pretty old, and Windows couldn't run on it very good anymore. I mean, Windows doesn't run good on anything new, but that's because it's Windows. But it runs even worse on an older system. Yeah, it's Windows in a nutshell.
That's Windows Vista in a nutshell.
It is. It is. Windows Vista was horrible. I actually had a friend that liked. I know. I actually had a friend that liked Windows Vista, and I'm like, there's something wrong with you. I mean, it's one thing to like Windows 7 because that was actually a decent version of Windows, but come on. If you like Windows Vista, there's something wrong with you. But anyways, now that we've probably offended a small portion of our audience, I don't know. They probably don't use Windows Vista. I'd say Windows Vista's end of life, so who's using that anymore? Probably nobody. But anyways, the point is Linux is so good when it comes to performance. I mean, again, I have took laptops. I have an old laptop here from Compaq that I use just to browse the web and listen to music. It's not really used for anything else. And that laptop ran on Windows so slowly. I had it on Windows 7, and I put it on the classic desktop. I had tried Windows 10 on it because I was told that would run faster on it. I can tell you right now, Windows 10 didn't run faster on it, which I wasn't surprised. Newer OSs usually run slower, not faster, because they're adding more features and expecting you to have more RAM, system resources like CPU, etc. Anyways, so Windows 7 even was so slow. And I mean, Windows 7, it was so slow, and half the time you click the start menu or something or icon, it would take 3 or 4 seconds before it would even respond on the GUI to let you know something had happened. And then versus that, compare that to putting Linux on it. Now, I put a lightweight Linux distro on it. I put a couple different distros on. I put Ubuntu on it, then I put Elementary OS on it, which is pretty lightweight. And I have to say, it actually runs pretty good. It is still a little sluggish sometimes, but in comparison to Windows on it, it's like amazingly different. Windows was so slow, you pretty much couldn't use it. On Elementary OS or Ubuntu on it, I can use it. It's a little slow sometimes. I might have to occasionally wait for something to load a few seconds, but in comparison, it's just no comparison. It's much better. It's give that machine another chance at life. So, and that's great. Anyways, but I think that covers the performance stuff. I mean, basically the gist of it is Linux performs in many situations better than Windows. Now, again, in many situations, there is some situations it doesn't. For example, graphics performance, you're going to probably get better graphics performance in a game or something, not on OpenGL under Linux or Mac OS, but probably under DirectX, honestly. It's one of the few things Microsoft made that's actually good. And so
Microsoft making something good. What is this?
I know it doesn't happen often. It's pretty rare. I think DirectX is pretty much the only example. That's about it. Maybe VS Code's pretty good. I like it too. It's not a bad editor. So maybe that's the other thing they made, but I don't know. But of course, that's written in Electron, so it can't be that bad if it's an Electron. And I should point out, some people in the Linux world don't like Electron. I think it's great. It's great for development. It's very flexible. And here's the thing: if you don't realize the fact that more and more apps on Windows, Mac, and Linux is becoming effectively a GUI that's in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and then you have a backend that's in like Node or Python or something. I mean, if you don't realize more and more apps are doing that, Spotify does that and has for several years. Skype does that now. Discord does that. I mean, you're gonna
have done that.
Well, yeah, a lot of apps started out like that. Discord started out like that. But the point is, and Skype has transitioned to that recently. The point is that you're really getting to a point where there's going to be a lot of apps you're going to want to use that it's going to be an Electron app. And again, as long as you have a relatively powerful system, it's going to run just fine. Electron apps do use a little bit more RAM than other applications, and I don't particularly like that. Sometimes they use a little more CPU, but it's not that bad, and they're very, very, very nice apps. And the thing is, as a developer, it's so much better to develop on Electron because I write one code base and it supports Mac, Windows, and Linux, and I have ultimate control over my GUI. If you write something in one of the GUI toolkits under Python, for example, it's going to look like the OS wants it to look. And for some apps, that's fine, and actually, I kind of prefer that, honestly, but a lot of developers want to actually go in and customize the way buttons look and everything. You have way more control over that in Electron because it's basically just a web page for the GUI, and you can write custom CSS for it. You can, do whatever you need to do. You can use Bootstrap or anything else. Anyways, we're getting off into the deep end here from a developer standpoint now. So I apologize for the whole 2 people that was listening that wasn't developers. Yeah. Out of the 4 people that's listening, of course. So 2 of them left.
2 people aren't developers. 2 people are.
I'm just kidding. I don't know. Maybe that's maybe that's the split of our audience. Let us know in the chat if you're a developer, guys, if you want.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're going to talk about the end of the meeting now, because we're pretty much done with our talk. Well, speaking at the users group meeting, that's this, if you didn't know. Well, there's some requirements. Got to be 18 years or older if you want to come up and talk. That's just because we don't want to have to deal with paperwork and be like, oh, okay, you're 17 and a half and you want to speak about Linux. Well, that's all cool and dandy, but now we got to get your parental consent because you're going to be on the air, and we have to make sure that's okay with them. We got to go and get all these paperwork filled out to prove that you're okay with it. And I should point out, even if you're over 18, you still have to consent to being on the air. But it's a lot less complicated to do that consent if you're an adult, because no one has to consent for you. You just consent yourself and we're done. Anyways, so we don't want to have to deal with that. So got to be 18 years or older. You need to have a good mic and a good webcam. You don't have to have the best webcam in the world, but the mic needing to be good is like a top priority. We really need a good quality mic because people need to be able to hear you. If they can't see you as good, depending on what you're doing, if you're screen sharing most of it, as long as you have a good mic. Most of these talks are screen shares of like a slideshow or something. And so as long as you have a good mic, that's really the main thing in those situations. If you're like doing something where you're like showing a lot of stuff on camera, then yeah, a good webcam's important in that case. Have a good topic. Pretty common sense, but we're going to point it out anyways. I mean,
have
a good topic, right? Don't come here and start talking about something completely off topic, right? I mean, we want a topic that is related to Linux. It doesn't have to be exactly focused on Linux, but like, for example, let's say you're like me and you're a developer and you want to talk about developing with Python, right? That's an example. Well, you can talk about that in a Linux context, and you can branch out and, touch on Windows and Mac systems and BSD systems and stuff a little bit as well. We also will accept talks about BSD, by the way. I just thought I'd point that out. BSD is something I think is pretty cool. It's also open source. We're big supporters of open source here. So again, if you want to talk about open source, you want to talk about BSD, Linux, things related to those things, probably going to be a good talk in our opinion, and we're going to approve it probably. We're going to need you to have one of 3 forms of contact. Preferably, we want a Discord for the contact. The second preferred contact is phone, and the final preferred contact would be email. So in other words, email, that's a last-ditch effort. We really don't want to have to use email to talk to you. We will if we have no choice, but we don't want to. Again, as far as the meeting itself goes, you do need to have a Google Hangouts account. You can also use that as your contact method for us beforehand if you'd like. That's quite fine as well. But again, you're going to have all those checkboxes checked. Now, assuming that all these things match and you think you would be a great guest speaker, we haven't been getting guest speaker submissions in a while. If you'd like to go ahead and submit one of those, just all you got to do is go to the link on your screen there. And we'll also have that in the description below. And on that page, there's a form which indicates that you can speak. On that form, you're going to fill out your name and a few other things, what form of contact you want, what your topic is. Give us a paragraph or less about what topic you want to talk about. And if the admins, myself, Tyler, and a few other admins in the group likes this idea for a talk, we will approve it. I should point out all talks are moderated. So, that's important. One other thing I didn't...
Random topic about something stupid.
Yeah. One other thing I want to point out, too, that I should have put on the slides, but I didn't think to. We are trying to make sure that we don't allow anything that's not family friendly in our meetings or anything. We want people to be able to sit there, and if they don't want to hear cuss words or something inappropriate, they shouldn't have to. Okay. So that being said, your talk should not contain profanity, or anything of that sort. We want this to be. I'm sorry, folks. I can't pronounce. I corrected it already, Tyler. Though I said profanity.
Pronunciation for us.
No, it won't. Profanity, folks. So anyways, don't say, we don't want any cuss words in your talk or anything like that, okay?
Cuss word.
So if you was to accidentally say a cuss word, that's one thing. But, if you're doing it intentionally, that's another. And again, let's do our best not to say one, okay? We did have a meeting a few weeks where Tyler accidentally said a cuss word, but, nobody's perfect. This is live, folks, so I would caution you that. If you're really sensitive to cuss words, there's a small chance one of us might accidentally say one without meaning to. Again,
son of a cussing cuss word.
Again, we do our best to not cuss in meetings and make sure that all guests that are going to speak are pre-screened and are aware that they are not supposed to cuss. But if something was to go wrong and someone does, like I said, folks, just keep that in mind. There's a small chance somebody might accidentally drop a cuss word in the middle of a meeting. Again, not purposefully.
Hopefully not the F-bomb.
Well, there you go, Tyler. But okay. Anyways, yeah. Hopefully, if you do drop a cuss word, it's one that's not that bad. Anyways, what cuss words that are not that bad is kind of a perspective thing. I mean, some people think some cuss words are worse than others. We are way off topic. Anyways, if one of the admins likes your talk idea, we'll reach out to you if we like the idea. I said one of the admins. I mean, if the admins will talk, and if we like the idea for your talk, then what we're going to do is one of us will reach out to you.
Well, I guess it would be a meeting.
And yeah, well, it is a meeting. Yeah, if one of us likes your idea for a talk during a meeting, one of the admins will then reach out to you. So if we like the talk that you've suggested, the admins, one of us will then reach out to you and say, hey, okay, the admins like your idea. When can you talk? When can you do your talk? We're going to schedule your talk at that point, and that's why we ask for that form of contact. In addition to that, we also want to make sure that you have a good webcam at this point and a good mic, because again, those are requirements. Again, the webcam, not so much, depending on what your talk is, but the mic is definitely required to be good. So again, we need to make sure those boxes are checked. That's actually one thing we need to check on Tyler. Tyler's not got the best mic in the world, but we're going to work on getting that fixed here shortly. I'll probably just send him an old mic or something here anyways. But anyways, folks, that concludes the meeting. This is Vincent with the Linux Users Group, and Tyler, of course, is here. Tyler, where can we find you online?
My YouTube, and that's about it.
All right, great. And his YouTube link will be in the description below. As for me, you can find me at vincentmagger.com. And again, I also have a YouTube channel. You can find me on those places throughout the week. Thank you guys very much for joining us for this meeting. We hope you guys had a great time and enjoyed learning about Linux. And we will talk to you guys soon. Oh, one other thing I almost forgot to mention in this meeting. We will take questions during the meeting at the end from the chat, assuming there is any. But so far, there hasn't been any questions. So if you have any questions, guys, during that next meeting, feel free to reach out and actually ask it. With that, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you guys soon.